Hi, I'm Eddie Goldstein, and I'm here to tell you how awesome it would be if, in addition to being an excellent scientist, you were also an excellent science communicator. Imagine this. You just had a breakthrough with your research. You walk into a large auditorium to explain your results, and at the end, everybody understands exactly what you're talking about. Or imagine this. You go to Congress to ask them for funding for your project, and at the end, they look up and go, "Whoa, that was really clear. You make some excellent points." You know, for a lot of scientists, that's not what's happening. But imagine if it were. You could have like a whole generation of future scientists following in your footsteps. You could get the funding that you need to move your project forward. But it's not just about you. It's also about the impact that you can have on society. And by that, I'm referring to the public understanding of science. I am a science communicator. My job is to work with scientists to help them figure out better ways to explain their science to other people. Because I love science. I want as many people to enjoy science as possible. Well, one time, a couple years ago, I was at a conference looking forward to hearing a famous scientist explain his work. And when I got in there, I didn't understand anything he was talking about. I looked around the room. Everybody's writing, nodding their heads. Man, I felt so dumb. I felt like, was I the only person there who didn't know what was going on? But even more than feeling dumb, I just wanted to get out of there. I just wanted to distance myself. But you know what? Right now in our country, there are plenty of people that no matter when they listen to a scientist, they feel like they're so dumb. They feel like they just want to distance themselves. Clear science communication would help with that public understanding of science, which we all know is so important. And that's what I hope that you get from what I'm saying today, is that clear science communication is such an important skill, but it's not just about being an extra good scientist. It is its own set of skills which can be learned. And imagine if all scientists, in addition to learning their discipline, learned these skills of good science communication. The main thing that a good science communicator is always asking him or herself is this: how can I help my audience understand what I'm talking about? How can I help my audience? So, here are 3 ways that you can help your audience understand what you're talking about. Number 1, you have to employ quotidian parlance. It doesn't matter how brilliant a scientist somebody is. If they don't employ quotidian parlance, half of their audience might not understand what they're talking about. As a matter of fact, if you didn't happen to know that employ quotidian parlance means use everyday language, you might not understand what I was just talking about. This is so important that I want to play you a little video clip. This is Dr. Anthony Fauci when he was being interviewed on just this topic.
When you talk to a group like this, how do you talk the language? Sometimes you just get, the average person gets lost.
Well, you have to make sure you're understood, and I make it a very important goal that you don't want to impress people and razzle dazzle them with your knowledge. You just want them to understand what you're talking about.
You don't want to razzle-dazzle people with your knowledge. You just want them to understand what you're talking about. And for such a little thing like using everyday language to have such a big impact, why not? Why wouldn't you do it? A second thing that you can do to help people understand what you're talking about is to communicate your science with mental pictures. It's one thing to give out the results of your work, but what you really want to try to do is give an understanding of what your thinking is. Let me be very concrete. We are right now in the middle of a terrible COVID-19 pandemic. Scientists have been trying to figure out how it gets transmitted from one person to another person, and several mental models have come up. One is about touching something and then touching your face. Another mental model has to do with when you sneeze, how far those droplets go before they hit the ground. But a very curious thing happened right at the beginning of this pandemic in a restaurant in China. People on one side of the restaurant infected people who were sitting all the way at the far end of that restaurant. It didn't fit with the mental models that the scientists already had. And so they had to come up with a new mental model, which is, as you know, about aerosols. What that means is when somebody over here talks, they might spew virus into the air, and that virus begin to float and hover in the air. So that even at a later time, if somebody walked through that cloud of virus, they could be infected. So why is it so important to have a mental model, a mental image like that? Because when you have a mental model, you can imagine ways to defend yourself from that transmission. You can come up with strategies. Things like having good ventilation. Things like how long you should stay in an indoor space before you get out of there. Well, now it's time to communicate your understanding to the general public. Sure, you can just give the results. Make sure you open up the window. Make sure you don't stay in there too long. Don't forget to wear a mask. But imagine how much more powerful it would be if you could actually communicate that whole mental model. Because if they could picture it the way you picture it, they also would understand the value of those rules. They also would understand strategies to protect themselves. There are lots of techniques that science communicators have come up with for communicating mental models, and those are crucial if you really want people to understand what you're talking about. So, using everyday language, communicating with mental models. A third technique, which is very effective, is this. It's to always be thinking from your audience's point of view. Now, I use the word audience because in addition to being a science communicator, I'm also a professional stage performer. I'm always thinking about my audience. What are they seeing right now? How are they understanding what's going on stage? Sometimes it's very literal. Sometimes I've got a spotlight in my face that is so bright that like I totally cannot see anything. But it's not about me. It's about them. You see, the very spotlight that makes it so hard for me to see is exactly what makes it so easy for them to see. Well, this same idea is true for science communication. And for science communication, it often shows up because your audience, your students, your listeners, whomever it happens to be, they might have preconceived ideas about how the world works that don't jive up with what you are trying to explain, and so there's an impasse. Let me be very concrete. Let's say you are a physics professor. You've gotten to that point where you're explaining the laws of motion, the one that says a body in motion stays in motion forever, doesn't change speed, unless acted on by an outside force. So you're explaining it, and you're trying to be very clear, but for some reason, they're just not getting it. But imagine if you could put yourself in their minds. What are they thinking? They've got a lot of experience that they're bringing to this, and one of those experiences might be about riding a bike. You know, if you ride a bike and you've got like 5 more miles to go, you can't just be coasting. You got to keep pedaling and pedaling and pedaling. And so if that's your world experience, you can't make it jive up with what the professor's saying. That's why it's so important to put yourself in their frame of mind. Understand what they're thinking, because then you will know how to exactly address their preconceptions and get through the understanding that you'd like to get through. This, by the way, is not just academic. Pretty soon we will be having vaccines for COVID-19, and as you know, it is crucial that as many people as possible take that vaccine. Believe me, there are plenty of people out there that when it comes to vaccines, they've got some preconceived ideas about how vaccines work. So, if all we do is communicate the results, here's how vaccines work, here's a couple of charts, here's a graph, here's some statistics, that might not get through to them. It will be crucial that we think about it from their point of view, that we directly address what their concerns are, what their misconceptions are. That is how we'll make an impact. Because if they don't understand us, we can never have the impact. Now, one thing that I hear all the time when I am doing my workshops is this. I'm a scientist. I talk to other scientists. We understand each other. We're good. And that might be true, but it might be true only for scientists who are in your very specific field. Scientists who are even a little bit outside your field might not be understanding you as well as you think. And why is that important? Well, we've all heard stories about scientists going to a conference. They are sitting in a lecture outside their field, just out of curiosity. And as they listen to the lecturer, they go, whoa. What she just said is the answer to my research problem. That was exactly the clue that I needed. It's that cross-disciplinary fertilization that is so important in science. And the more scientists who understand you, the more cross-fertilization can happen. Imagine a doctor sitting in at the physics of aerosols convention. It's that cross-fertilization that we need. But unfortunately, it's not happening all the time. It's not happening as often as we would like, because remember, if they don't understand you, you just can't have an impact. So what are the takeaways? The first takeaway is that science communication is its own discipline. These are things that can be learned, skills that can be learned in addition to your research skills. And they are so important. They're all about helping the audience understand what you're talking about. Things like using everyday language, communicating in mental images, thinking about things from the audience's point of view. And so right now, I would like you to think about something. I want you to think about your research. And now imagine that you are one of those superstar science communicators. What sort of impact could your science have? You know what? Maybe you would have like a whole generation of scientists following in your footsteps. Maybe you would get the funding that you need. Maybe you would have an impact on society with that public understanding of science that is so crucial. Maybe you would get cross-fertilization, collaboration that you couldn't even imagine. Because if they do understand you, you will have an impact. And so go out there, become an excellent science communicator. And if you're also an excellent, if you are already an excellent science communicator, become a great science communicator. Who knows? You might change the world. Now, I hope that you have enjoyed what I've been talking about. Maybe a couple of ideas that I said spark your curiosity. If that is so, I have a mind map. This explains everything that I was just talking about. And if you'd like a copy of this mind map, no problem. Just send me an email to eddie@eddiegoldstein.com and write the word mind map in the subject line, and I'll send you a copy of this mind map. Another question that comes up all the time is, what does this look like in practice? So when you send me that email, I will also send you a link to a show that I did a number of years ago with Alan Alda at the World Science Festival, where I used all of the techniques that I was talking about just now. And finally, while you're watching that video on my website, check out some other things. You might run across some other ideas that could work for you to become an even better science communicator than you already are. After all, you might change the world.